Pastor Trevor, it's good to have you here in the SAT studios. Welcome.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
It is always wonderful to speak about hope in Africa, and especially today I want us to look at that topic. And I know that you've been involved with various ministry outreaches and various efforts to create unity in this country and unity amongst communities, which is just wonderful. Maybe we can start off in this discussion by asking the question, what are some of the unique challenges that we are facing in Africa?
Yeah, before we thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this. I think for me, talking about hope, African people generally have been the hopeful people. It may not be a biblical or Christian hope, but in the Western context, we'll be called it optimism, which is not the same as hope.
Yeah, you're right.
Optimism is based on 1, 2, 3 things, 4, 5, 6 things. And because of that, then my future will be. But we Christians, we talk about hope, which is its object is in God.
Amen.
Outside of God, you cannot talk of hope. So it doesn't matter how dark it can be. Hence, the continent and our country or our continent has been that flickering hope. So the challenges that we have been having in the country, in the continent, I would use the word poverty, but not poverty in a material sense. It is big. I mean, like in Ethiopia and other countries where they had full-scale famine, you know. So it is a factor, we need to acknowledge that. But a deeper poverties that I'm talking about. Spiritual poverty, not to know God. Spiritual poverty, leadership poverty,
Sure.
Educational poverty. I want to go deep a little bit about educational poverty. Education is supposed to be equip people to face total reality, to know how to respond.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So our life every day, we are faced with a lot of things that expect us to respond. So when you don't have education, for example, bulk of African people don't have skills, don't have the know-how. So therefore, even those who are educated in quotes, that education is not adequate enough, you know, to help them to deal with the daily realities or total realities, you know. For example, Christian education in this continent, especially in South Africa, or most of these Christian institutions, especially Christian schools, for example, they're based in the rich
System.
suburbs, and yet where they're needed, it's in the township.
Yeah, for sure.
Technology, globalization, you know, all of this. So our education is not fit enough. It helps us to work for Coca-Cola, for a bank. But life is bigger than that after 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
you know, you have to know how to be a father,
you're right.
how to be a dad, how to be a mother, how to be, you know, how to be, let's forget politics, you know, just how to relate in a marriage context. So there are a lot of those challenges that our continent it is facing.
Pastor Trevor, especially with the younger generation, there is almost a struggle to see hope and a future in Africa. What can we as the church do to cultivate that presence of hope and also, like you said, not just an optimism, but an expectation to succeed?
Yeah. One of the things that is exciting about Africa is that Africa, for example, we have in the global youth of the world, we have 42% of the youth that are in, you know, they are in Africa. You know, about 60% of the population in Africa, let's forget it, the global world, are young people, younger than the age of 25.
Sure.
So that is a hope.
That is hope.
That is a hope.
Amen.
And then in the whole world, people are older, you know, they get older, and yet in the Africa we have. So that is a good sign. So 2 is that because of that, if we're talking about cultivation of hope, we need to see that and run to it and say, here are the young people.
Yes.
Unfortunately, because of miseducation or undereducation and these other poverties, we as a church, and later I want to talk about that, we need to run into these young people because they fall into wrong hands. Like Boko Haram, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. We have young Afrikaners in this country who are looking for a direction because they've been blamed and they've never been part of apartheid. Yes, they benefited.
Yeah, for sure.
But somebody needs to come and say to them, listen, here's the way. Here's the way. But in the absence of that, I'm afraid that we might lose them. But it's a exciting potential that need to be tapped and be redirected, and not only political, because I think our continent or the world, if I have to say, is extremely politicized.
You're
to
right.
the detriment of a lot of stuff. You know, when you say you are educated or you are aware, it means you are politically aware, and spiritually we are malnourished.
Right.
We are not aware of the implication of that. So the politicization of life,
right.
For me, it's a concern.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Pastor, how do we, as an older generation, I'm not saying I'm an older generation, but how do we relate to the youth and draw them into would be perceived to be church life, practical church life and practical ministry and getting them involved and succession of leadership? It seems that there's something that is amiss. The interesting thing is when I was in the UK, I went to a church in the morning. It was all grey heads and there were no young people. The evening I went to a Nigerian church and it was full and it was all young people.
There's a lot of energy.
Yeah, for sure. Beautiful songs. But the point is just simply how do we practically start with succession in the church and as leaders to get these young people on board?
Yeah. I think our ego, we have an ego that is bigger than the universe.
Absolutely.
Which is very sad.
You're right.
I'm talking about old people. Rudolph, the other thing that I need to say is that the mess that is in the world, the corruption, the decay, the misleadership that is in the world. I'm thinking, I'm not saying enough, but the mess that we are in is purely because of old people.
Sure.
Young people, a few of them. If we have to talk about our context in South Africa, it will be the Malimas and all that. I'm not saying they have not done stuff. They've also done their young people have also the arrogance, the thinking that they know. You know, it must be challenged. But old people need to acknowledge that the past, the corruption of the ANC as we speak, the corruption of apartheid, the corruption, the embodiment of corruption in the in colonial era, all of them were old people. Therefore, if you want to go and want to help the young people, you need to own up. You need to have an attitude that is repentant, of humility, to say, we messed up. Just quickly before we go, just want to an anecdote that I've heard somewhere. Some people were talking about the ANC Youth League. And they were saying, what are you going to do about corruption? And they said, no, we continue with it.
Sure.
You started it. You're supposed to have stopped it. And we are not. We continue with it. And whether this is a fact or not, but somebody who is respected in the echelons of the ANC told me, talking with his children who happen to be in the leadership of the ANC. So all I'm trying to say is that if you want to have an integrity to talk with young people, don't come with I know it all, I've seen it all, which is true.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but acknowledge, especially if you call yourself a Christian, you say, we messed it up, you know, but this is what we can give it to you and run with it.
It's always amazing that true reconciliation starts with that brokenness and that humility that you speak of. And sometimes when we look at the country, especially when you look at politics and especially the church in recent times, there's almost a form of arrogance. There's a hierarchical structure of leadership, and a lot of people can't break beyond the leader because the leader almost keeps everybody subservient.
Yeah.
Where do we start as leaders in Africa to give away our authority, if you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
so that the next generation is empowered?
That's a hard question.
It is.
Yeah. I think one of the sicknesses or the neurosis about African church, especially the leadership, is that, like somebody would say, I'm quoting someone, I think it was John Mbiti who said, the church in Africa is notoriously religious.
Yeah.
So when you are religious, there are beautiful aspects about religiosity, but also, bulk of the stuff, religion can stifle life out of us. So religion in the continent has made people to look old. So because you're so religious, you want to hold on. Same in the political aspect. Our leaders, look at Museveni, you know, he's 80-something.
Still.
Yeah, still in power.
Still.
Mugabe was in power.
Still.
You know, South Africa, at least we had a good example of Ntate Madiba, who stayed for one term, and then he set an example. But the narrative of the continent is that old people. No wonder we birth the EFF. The EFF have to push themselves. You have to push, literally had to go into the parliament and push Ntate Zuma out. We know that, we saw that, and these were young people. And then he came to the psyche of these old people. They say, you know what? We need to do something. As we speak now, that old ANC is being led by old people. So we have to trust God, but also because we talk about practical stuff, we need to tap and exploit the wisdom that is amassed in these young people. You know, I'm not a fan of Julius Malema, but I have a high respect of him because they were not scared. They were bold to go into that space.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So young people all over the world, they have this guts in them. You saw it in Tiananmen Square in China many years ago. 1976, it was young people in this country. So we have a lot of them. And they're coming, whether they have education or no skills, but they will, you know. 1976, in Soweto, those were not educated.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. They were just maybe semi-literate or undereducated, but definitely bulk of them because of the poor quality of apartheid education, Bantu education. They used what they had. They ran. And today, we in a month's time or so, we'll be celebrating the 19th. So all I'm trying to say, there is a hope that if we don't do anything, after all, Jesus Christ was a young person.
Yeah,
He was by the time he went into political space, so to speak, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but when he went to that space, what happened, he was at 30 years. For the next 3 years, you saw this young person. And it's kind of hard for us to see Jesus as a young person. We always see him as an old. Yeah, but he was young. He was radical, you know. So I think that there is a hope, yeah.
Pastor, when we speak about practical steps, I've seen this with churches. They always divulge to specific elements which they think work, but it's a bit outdated. Like, let's start a feeding scheme. Let's start a soup kitchen. What are some of the things that you find in communities that is revolutionary and that actually works?
Yeah, I think for me it's education.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's something about giving, and for me when I talk about education, I'm saying in quotes. The simplest way that I when I define education is the current education that we have in the continent, even in the global world, is a education that equips me to go for Coca-Cola, to work for Coca-Cola, to go for this or Wall Street in New York, and then you get good money, then therefore you are educated.
Yeah, you're
But
right.
for me, it's not.
Mm-mm.
But so for me to answer a question is that what is revolutionary is to equip young people to go to school, especially Africans. I want to say to them, go to school. If it's possible, get a good quality education. If it's us Christians, let's try hard to give a Christian education. I just want to need to qualify. If we look back 50 years ago, the missionary Christian schools, some of them they had an agenda. They were used by the political superiors,
Mm-hmm.
but the quality of the people they produce, the Tutus of this world. Bishop Tutu went to a Christian school. Mandela went to those.
Mm-hmm.
We have a cream of them, a crop of them.
Our
you know.
president went to Christian school.
Yes, yeah, and he's supposed to be a Christian. Shouldn't say that, but
Mm-hmm.
they went to this, and the kind of leadership that they portrayed. You know, I'm not saying they're perfect, but if you compare that with what we have today, you can see the kind of leadership. You know, so I would say one of the revolutionary thing. I wouldn't write off to finish the sentence. One of the revolutionary thing is to expose them to good quality education. At the core of it, it must be Christ-centered. Because there's something about, because they went to the Christian schools, and they come with values.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Very
that
good.
give people dignity.
You're right.
The kind of education that we have, it doesn't give people dignity. It dehumanizes people.
You're right.
When you've got a car, when you've got money, when you've got even in so-called education, you dehumanize those who don't have it.
You're right.
So, because we are in Africa, let's continue with feeding scheme, but we must know, because where I work in a squatter camp, I work in the RDP area. Poverty, food poverty, it's real. So the feeding scheme and all that, they have their place. But let's not think we are radical when we do that. We need to ask. Yeah, for example, let me quote one of the guys that I respect. He's late now. He's from South America. He's a Catholic priest. He says, whenever I give the food to the poor, they say I'm a saint. But when I ask, why do the poor don't have food? They say, I'm a communist.
Wow.
Yes. And this is Kamara,
Sure.
you know. So basically this guy is trying to say, give people food, but go beyond that. This guy was, that I just quoted, this Catholic priest. He's a priest. He was a priest.
Mm.
So these words, they come out of the mouth of not a communist. He's saying, in other words, Christian leaders must ask right questions. Why the poor don't have food?
Yeah,
And then the hero worship him, they say, wow, you are a saint. But then he asks, but why don't they have it? And they say he's a communist.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think to be revolutionary, you feed. Jesus would feed and make food. And at the same time, he will disciple them, address reality issues, including
so
spiritual issues.
That is so good that you said it, Pastor Trevor. So if I follow you correctly, you say education is key, but education needs to translate into something that is tangible and present in a community, like integrity. And let's maybe speak
and
about
subversive and revolutionary.
Yes, and you've touched upon something earlier. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. How do we take our educational institutions to become more pragmatic so it addresses the needs in our communities?
We live in the 21st century. Our curriculum, most of it, I'm talking about the continent, is still in the 21st century. We need to review, including the theological thing, space. We need to be aware that most of that curriculum, especially in the continent, it came out of the oppressive, colonistic regime. Therefore, they're no longer relevant. Not all of it. Maybe we need to repackage that. Yeah. So I think we need to go there without being scared and realize we live in a different world. One of the things
Very
that we Africans, we are rich. Spirituality. I know, can talk about the dark spirituality, but African people, as I said earlier on, can be notoriously, because it's somebody else who uses, Johnny B to use it, notoriously religious.
Yeah, you're right.
But you can cultivate that for hope to say Jesus Christ is essentially, or God is spiritual, you know, and use that as a form of education. We have people who claim proudly so that they're educated, but when you come to the spiritual realities, they don't have a clue.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a materialistic, nihilistic, atheistic approach from the West. So we've taken the Western kind of education that is very practical,
Scientific method
scientific,
is the only method.
Yeah.
You're right.
And then we need to embrace that. But life is bigger than that.
I agree.
There's a spiritual reality. In African context, there is ubitagat, witchcraft.
That's huge.
It's not an illusion. This is real. So when we equip people with education, it must have the spiritual reality, because this is a reality in the African world. When people take political office, when people take a position in the banks, position in high, they go and consult with the youngers.
Of course.
And then some of us, because we think we are educated, like the arrogant West, they think what they have with it. Exactly, primitive and all that.
Yeah, you're right.
And then the same people, they will talk about, what is this, New Age.
Oh, yes.
Which
Animism.
Animism. Very spiritual, falsely spiritual. So the reason I'm emphasizing that is that the kind of education that we have, it must be holistic.
Yeah, you're
It
right.
must not just get somebody who's got a mathematics and physics and technology, and then you leave people who don't know how to deal with the daily realities. I question that kind of education. So we need to say this is our context, especially in Africa. The other thing that I need to mention, the church, the global church, is now the center and the power of the church has moved, or is still moving, to the south.
Absolutely.
And I am scared that the church in the south, which is bulk of it is in Africa, we have more Christians in Africa more than in the whole world. And I don't think the church in Africa is ready. And I fear people like us, and when I say us, I'm talking about South African church, black and white, the Western church, that is so arrogant. Let me say why I'm thinking it's arrogant. For example, the South African black church, I know I generalize. There are times where we should rightly so generalize. The South African black church looks down on the church in the continent. Hence we have xenophobic tendencies. The white church has always seen itself as a part of the Western church.
Yeah, for sure.
And then they look down. If even in the language, they say, I'm going to Africa. Forget it, we are in Africa.
Exactly.
So I am scared and anxious when I look at when God raising the African church, and I'm looking at the South African church, which bulk of it has aligned itself with the Western church, and they see themselves as those who want to go and help or need it to cultivate hope. And I'm saying, you know what? Maybe you should wait until you're invited. I'm talking about as a black church, South African black church. I cannot talk for other countries. The Western church, with all its resources, the money, the technology, and all that, they should wait. There's something that is exciting about the African church. It's got not all, most of the attributes, like the early church. Let me push it even further. Like a poor church. Jesus Christ was born in a poor area, Nazareth.
Yeah, which is
the early church was poor. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have all, and yet they became the most powerful church. I'm talking about Africa. It's got most of it's poor. It's unscientific. Peter and the guys always say, "Who are these who are illiterate?"
Yeah.
Africa is ripe, not to go to the West and say, And then the West wants to come and help so that tomorrow they want to take glory. We should not allow that. We should allow Africa to come as weak, as struggling, as poor, like the early church. Paul says to the church in 1 Corinthians, he says, many of you, when you came here, you come from here, you were nobodies.
Yes.
There's no one who's got a noble background. And he says, you know what? What I'm interested in is you. I'm not interested in your literacy, your philosophy. I want to know Christ Jesus. Not the resurrected one, the weak one, the one who was crucified. That's Paul is saying. In other words, he's trying to say, I'm not interested in your power, in your good speech, your oratory skills, and all of this. It doesn't necessarily, we don't need that, but there's a place for that. The same Paul says, when I'm weak, is when I'm strong, because then God is able to exploit. Even our Lord Jesus Christ, he was born in a humble place. Even when he teaches, he talks about seeds, he talks about slaves. One of the parables that I love, sorry to take longer, it's a story of Jesus when he says, how can I explain the kingdom of God? He says, it was this guy. His name was Vineyard. I'm just making an example to contemporize that. He wakes up in the morning, jumps into his bakkie, and then he runs to his huge farm. On his way, he realized that people are looking for a job. And then he takes the first group. The first group says, we sign a contract. Soweto and I, we sign a contract. We agree, I will pay you for a day, I'll pay 1,000 rand. I know I exaggerate. 1,000 rand. And then he comes again 9 o'clock. The first group came at 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, until 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, he still find people standing there.
And he still pays them.
He still pays them. But the point is that I want to raise, these are laborers. These are servants. These are slaves. Jesus using that parable to liken what the kingdom looks like. I'm using that there are many parables, about 42 or 30 something parables, depending on how you define parables. I'm using that one deliberately because it's got an image of laborers who were slaves, who were standing in the corner, which we can identify in South Africa with these black men sitting there.
Yeah, for sure.
And then this guy, he keeps coming in between, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, At the end of the day, he says, he finds the last group. These are laborers who have hope. So there's a hope in Africa of these people still waiting. This is a church. It's a parable. I'm taking from the parable of Jesus. And so why are you standing there? And then he brings them and he pays them the same. So the church in Africa must take that role of Vineyard, who pays their workers with integrity. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the work, it's about people, because these are human beings. The value, the dignity. We live in a world where people are dehumanized. If there's anybody or people in the world that has been exploited, taken advantage of, maybe we can say there are a lot of people. Maybe we can say even the Jews through the Nazi and all that, the Holocaust.
Yeah, sure.
But if the people have been dehumanized, it's Africans. So the story of the parable of Jesus, this guy pays them same, because it's a dignity, so that when you get home, and then those who feel that they are entitled, the Soweto and all that, they go like, yeah, but we came earlier. We need to be paid. And he says, did you have agreement? But that's not my point. My point basically is that with this parable is that the church in Africa must see themselves with that parable, where they realize they are servants, they are laborers, they are workers, their boss is Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
the Western world has taught us the arrogance, the triumphalism, the Donald Trump
the
kind of
hierarchical structure of things.
You know.
Yeah, for sure.
Isn't it embarrassing, we evangelical, Pentecostal, to associate ourselves with Donald Trump, now with the scandal that's coming up?
Yeah, it's a bit,
So unfortunately, that's the Western church that we have become part of. So we need to be radically deassociated with all those values, not with the church per se of the West, but because they contributed. And then this misnomer that the Bible, the church was brought in Africa by the Western world is not true. It's not true. The guy who carried the cross
started in Africa.
He was an African.
I spoke to Dr. Mzondi yesterday, and he wrote a book called Ubuntu Pentecostalism.
Yes.
A part of the argument of the book, and sorry I'm interrupting.
No, go ahead, yeah.
Is Christianity started in Africa by Africans.
Yeah.
And it's just such a refreshing thing to see. Pastor, it is incredible to have you here, and I'm sure we will have another follow-up conversation.
We're done. Wow,
We're done, but maybe in closing, if you can impart a few words of wisdom, but also let everybody know at the home if they can contact you. Do you have an email address anywhere where they can contact you?
Yeah. Thank you for saying those beautiful words. I wanted to say this. Many of our young people, they have this, they may be provocative, this nonsensical attitude that the Bible or the church was brought in Africa by white people. So it is condom. So it is with Mercedes. So it is with other stuff. So when you do want to do away with the Bible, be consistent. Do away with this. Do away with condom. Do away with all this. Don't be selective in your morality. And I'm doing that with an attitude. Yeah. So in closing, I would like to say to us as an African church, let's not look down on ourselves. Probably we are a church that's being made ready by the Lord, by being weak, by struggling, by being poor and all that. Those qualities. I'm not saying we should worship that. Poverty is bad, weakness is bad and all that. But I don't want to be like the church in the West with power and all that and arrogance. So let's bring this thing before God. Let's not be seduced by the power in the West and all the glamour they have. Let's go with a humble attitude. And who knows, because of that, like the early church, God will find us attractive and we might have more than a revival. We might have something that the world has never seen. Everybody in the world, they're looking to Africa. The people are interested to come to Africa because something is happening. So let's take advantage of that and make ourselves available and see what God will do. And then those who want to get in touch with me, my number here.
You're welcome.
So, but I think you'll print it somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll do so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us and imparting your wisdom, and I'm sure we'll have you back.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. May God the Lord bless you. Thank you.